While much of the auto industry is warning that new tariffs could raise prices, strain supply chains, and cut sales, Senator Bernie Moreno says the opposite. He thinks tariffs will be, quote, fantastic. That's what he told a room full of auto leaders at the Automotive Forum in New York, just hours after economists and analysts shared much more cautious outlooks. We won't be talking about this next year at the auto show. We will be saying, we can't keep up with sales. This is fantastic. Moreno, a former dealer turned U.S. senator, dismissed concerns that 25% auto tariffs would disrupt the industry. His comments stood in sharp contrast to data shared earlier in the day, including a J.D. Power projection warning that the tariffs would knock U.S. auto sales down by nearly 8% this year. When asked if these tariffs would be permanent, Moreno suggested something like a 10% tariff could stick around, as long as it's fair, and praised President Donald Trump's approach as tough but negotiable. He told automakers to stop resisting and start negotiating, saying, "There's an administration very open to making these kinds of deals." To break down what this moment means politically and for the industry, I spoke with Molly Boigon, the reporter who covered Moreno's remarks in New York. You covered Senator Moreno's remarks at the New York Auto Forum. Can you set the scene a bit for us? What was the mood in the room leading up to his comments?
It was a day of pretty pessimistic projections about the impact of the tariffs on the automotive industry. You had first a global economic outlook that projected less discretionary spending for households to purchase vehicles. You had a industry-specific outlook that projected in the tens of billions of dollars in losses from the tariffs. And, speaker after speaker just kept coming up and talking about the tariffs in different ways. And there were a lot of jokes about how everyone kind of couldn't wait for happy hour and, how stressful it's been. And then the last speaker before the happy hour was Senator Moreno, who came up with just a completely different attitude. I think he was really projecting a very positive and sort of optimistic vision of what the tariffs and other Trump policies would do for the industry. And it was definitely a departure from the earlier conversations in the day. The senator's in a very interesting position because he's a former auto dealer and he's a cheerleader of President Trump's administration and aligned with the president on a lot of his policy decisions. And so I think he was trying to just sort of project optimism and confidence about the tariff impact and, speak to an audience that historically has been fairly politically conservative and receptive to that type of messaging, but in this context was feeling a lot of fear and uncertainty about the impact of the tariffs on the industry.
He mentioned the idea of automakers making a deal with the administration in exchange for tariff relief. Has there been any talk from the White House or the auto industry about how that would actually work?
Especially at the Auto Forum, it was very unclear to me what he meant by this because Congress is the branch of government that has the power of the purse. And he was sort of echoing some of the language that President Trump has used to describe himself as a political candidate and as the president, as a businessman, as a deal maker. And at the same time, there's more factors that go into how companies or even agencies are allocated federal funds. However, in the week following the auto show, there's been some reporting that's come out about how industry groups and lobbyists have approached the White House seeking exemption from the tariffs. And that's some of the reporting that's described how that list of exempted products and codes has come out. So in hindsight, I wonder if Senator Moreno was talking about something like that, the automotive industry appealing to the administration to get carve-outs from some of the tariff impacts. However, he used the term runway, which to me describes a sort of financial package of some kind meant to sort of pad the impact or otherwise incentivize the nearshoring of automotive manufacturing. And on that, I'm really not totally sure what he meant.
You've been covering the policy side of this closely. How are automakers responding behind the scenes to the idea that these tariffs could become long-term or even permanent?
My sense is that there's a lot of confusion about what the goal of some of these tariffs are, because you have, on the one hand, rhetoric from the administration that suggests that the tariffs are meant as a bargaining chip to garner the U.S. the better end of a global trade deal. And that suggests that the tariffs are temporary because they would be responding to movement by other countries offering the U.S. an advantage. You then have the administration also talking about reshoring domestic automotive and parts manufacturing. And that implies that the tariffs would be permanent, because it's at that point that we would basically cut the nation off from a global automotive supply chain. That lack of clarity has been troubling to people in the industry. And most recently, that's illustrated to me by this letter that was published by NADA and by the Alliance for Automotive Innovation, saying this is some of the projected economic impact of the auto parts tariff as we're sort of hurtling towards this May 3rd deadline. So these are, again, our two groups that have dealt closely with presidential administrations of all parties, and the fact that they went public with this letter as we approach this deadline is a clear indication to me of the increasing anxiety around the lack of clarity, stability, and instruction on those tariffs.
Whether the tariffs are a temporary negotiating tactic or a long-term policy shift, Senator Moreno's comments show just how wide the gap is between political messaging and the economic concerns inside the industry. You can read Molly's full report at autonews.com, along with our latest coverage on tariffs, supply chains, and what's next for automotive.